Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Inspired in Berlin podcast. My guest today is Mounira Latrache. Mounira is an expert in mindfulness based self leadership and emotional intelligence. She brings 20 plus years of leadership experience at international brands like Google, Red Bull, and BMW. Mounira was a pioneer of Google's mindfulness community, and its success led her to train teams at companies around the world. As the co-founder of Connected Business and international certified Search Inside Yourself trainer, her mission is to empower leaders of the new paradigm who find new ways of co-collaboration to create a world that serves the next 7 generations to come. In the past years, she worked with and mentored more than 20,000 business people and trained hundreds of teachers globally. Her book, Connected Business: How I Learned to Lead Myself and Others, was published by Ariston Random House Publishing in April 2020. Mounira, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
So it's my pleasure to have you here. I got to know you 3 years ago at a Search Inside Yourself training organized by my employers at that time, and I really appreciated the training, the contents, the 2 days that we spent in the training area, and I could see how interesting and how, let's say, how many people were having this experience of discovering in a way their own values and some of the things they could do for themselves. So I really loved it. COVID meant that a lot of that kind of stopped in the last 2 years, but hopefully the world goes back to normal again. So I'm happy that we are here and we get to talk about it again. And I would love to also know what has changed, how you have been dealing with all of this. But first, how about you tell us your story in your own words? What got you started on this whole mindfulness journey and how has it changed?
Well, what got me started with this whole mindfulness journey was actually, a suffering around, first of all, I've always been a high achiever, doing tons of things. And I could tell I was always going to the edge of things, right? And seeing like I'm working so much, but I felt like something is wrong with that, like constantly overworking, constantly being busy. And I felt a little bit of an emptiness, not understanding exactly what it is about, but also like, on the one hand, I was doing so much, on the other hand, it felt empty to me. But also the surroundings that I was in, the corporate environment where I saw a lot of things that I was, bothered by. So the lack of diversity in general, and I'm not even talking about racial diversity or gender diversity. I talk about like just not empowering individuals and seeing them as individuals, but then also political games and just like found myself constantly seeing this environment that I was in, and I'm like, what am I doing here? But also at the same time, who am I in this? Like, I felt very often to not fit in, but I also saw that I was adapting to that because that was just how it was. As a young girl, when I started first working in corporate environment, I suffered because of all these things. But what do? You're like, you just like try to tell yourself internally, this is how it is. You have, in order to make it, you have to adjust and adapt and be like everyone else, right? But after doing this for 2 years, I noticed this is not the person I want to be. I don't even like myself. I look into the mirror and I'm like, who is this person? I don't even like you. And that just like became kind of my quest. And the quest was these 2 places inside of me. One was, who am I when I'm just authentically me and really following the kind of person I want to be? But then also, is it possible to create teams and organizations and environment where that is possible, so that not only I can be myself, but everyone can just be authentically themselves? And instead of political games and power plays, it's actually based on trust and based on real collaboration where we see the strengths and uniqueness of each individual. that was kind of like the question. And that question led me to a huge self-discovery journey. And on that self-discovery journey, I discovered mindfulness. Basically starting as a tool for, being less stressed and letting go of what happened in the day and stuff. But very quickly I noticed, wait a second, I've been investing so much in discovering who I am. But the more I do these mindfulness practices, the more I know myself, the more I'm in my integrity, the more I understand what my truth is and all these things. And I'm like, wow, what's happening? Why is this so linked to each other? And it just hooked me to understand more about mindfulness, because I was like just thinking it's either a very spiritual tool or it's just the stress release thing, right? But I found like it's so much more for me. And there's this huge world around mindfulness that I wasn't aware of. And so I kind of became engaged in it. And when I one of the corporates I worked with was Google. I worked for Google for almost 6 years and in leadership positions. And so I wasn't in HR or so, but I noticed how much the mindfulness helped me to become a better leader and to work differently and to be a different person, more in alignment, more in balance, more passionate, and empowered me in so many ways. So I started like reaching out to colleagues and basically teach them what I learned about mindfulness within the office environment. And I noticed that it helped people so much, and there were more and more people being interested. And at the same time, there was this colleague of mine, he was an engineer at Google, and he was like piloting a mindfulness program that was based on emotional intelligence. And just hearing it and then connecting those two dots, it made so much sense to me, because that's exactly like hearing the connection was exactly what I found, that it wasn't just, meditating for stress release. It was these mindfulness techniques, developed skill sets, developed all those, like, let's say, soft skills that we talk about so much, that they are important in business environment. And with mindfulness, we could develop them. And so I got hooked and I became a trainer in this program, Search Inside Yourself. That's when we met, right? That was the Search Inside Yourself training. Yeah, and back then it was just an internal in-company program. It wasn't like externally offered, but it became an independent nonprofit organization. And I was hooked to share it with as many people within Google as possible, and trained it all over the world. But also more and more people from outside companies came and approached me and said, what you're doing at Google, can you tell us about it? Can you come for a talk or maybe even do a training? So I started organizing public trainings where any kind of company could come. So it wasn't just for Google employees. I invited Google employees, but also other companies. And with such a success after the first time, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. We should do this more often. And it just like blew my mind how relevant it is for any company, right? Yeah. And so here's the story, how it goes. When you have a problem and you know the solution and no one offers it, you become an entrepreneur. That's kind of, entrepreneurship means offering solutions for a problem. And so I didn't want this to be my job at all. That was never my intention, but there was a need.
Wow. And I think you're speaking to a universal need, right? So many people feel unfulfilled in their work because of all the things you mentioned, because they don't feel seen or heard, or there's this disconnect between their own values and the corporate values, if they are stated even.
Right.
And so the need is definitely very universal, and you absolutely found a way to bring it to people in a way that they could benefit from it. What are some of the experiences that people relate to you when they come to Search Inside Yourself or any of the other things you do with them? What are their first reactions, and how do those journeys change over time?
I mean, very often when people in the business field come to this kind of mindfulness space, right, people are more skeptical. Many people are a little bit afraid of needing to join a dogma, or what is this about? And you know what? I'm so inviting all this skepticism because I was one of them. I was the same. I remember when I started with this, I'm like, what's this bullshit? And yeah, do I have to become spiritual now? What is this all about? So people come with, I would say, very healthy skepticism, right? And I never would try to say, oh, I'm going to convince you, and after that, you're not going to be skeptical. Actually, it's the other way around. What I want people to be is very curious about their own experience in it. That's the only thing that can really convince someone is the experience, right?
Right.
And I think that that's the cool thing. Most people in 2 days have an experience where they notice for themselves something has shifted, or they have an aha moment, understanding their own journey better, or understanding what's really important for them, or just connecting with many, many people over time and seeing how much they were longing for connecting in this way, right? Because we're not just having conversations in groups, but we're having very specific conversations that drive connection, and people notice the difference, between how they usually communicate and how they all of a sudden, being in a room full of strangers, connect in a way that I haven't connected in years, right? All those different aspects. So this is the beauty of this work, is it brings us closer to ourselves, but also closer to others without being forceful.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the beginning of self-leadership, in a way, that you recognize
Yes.
a need for yourself, you do something about it, and you have this experience that creates this empathy for yourself as well as other people? And
Absolutely.
what else goes into self-leadership?
I see self-leadership as basically this capacity for us to stay in the driver's seat of our own life, right? So it's really, no matter what's happening in the outside, that we can stay true to who we are and who we want to be and how we want to walk through life. But in theory, this sounds amazing. In reality, there's a lot of challenges going along the way. So when it comes to self-leadership, one of the crucial parts is self-awareness, is really understanding what's happening internally, and understanding that some of those internal mechanisms are not our real truth. Yeah, let's say, very much when we are not doing these kind of practices, we think everything we think is reality. But once we do those practices, we notice I am not my thoughts. And that's a powerful step to do, because we notice there's like, if I'm not my thoughts, I can finally also be free from them and have a choice how I react to these things. It's not me, it's not my identification. And that has a lot to do, which is also part of self-awareness, is understanding our own conditioning. So many people, or basically all of us, we have a certain conditioning, and that comes up, or that gets created in our childhood through different circumstances we went through socialization, through experiences, and through trauma. And trauma is not, many people think of trauma as something really, really bad must have happened. No, trauma can be little moments in our life that created a little shock moment, and that, almost like create this different way of thinking and different limitations inside of us. So knowing our conditioning is so important, because then in the moment when we, actually want to walk our own path and really be in integrity with it, we need to understand that part of what we're doing is just a mechanism, is not even who we really are. It's a mechanism that we have built over time, coming from different experiences. Another mechanism we carry a lot is the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. So the survival mechanism that we all carry as like an evolutionary way of needing to survive, right? And we still have the saber-toothed tiger mechanism inside of us, which means we are very much on alert constantly about a threat coming and threatening our life. So you can think of now 2 years, we were in a time that actually triggered all those things quite a lot. Our old conditioning, but also the survival mechanism, because we had a, life-threatening disease. We had unknown outcomes, which means part of what kicks in the survival mechanism is unpredictability and not knowing what's going to happen, right? In our natural mechanism, we feel the safest when we know what's going to happen in front of us. If we don't have that, we don't feel so safe. So all those mechanisms we need to be aware of. So in a moment when it kicks in, I need to become aware. That's why self-awareness is so important. Oh, I'm in my survival mechanism right now. Or, oh, I'm acting and thinking out of my conditioning right now. And the power of being aware of it that's the first step, but the power of it is that we can actually then decide to act and think and see things differently and write a different story, right? And that is, this is one of the most important parts of self-leadership, that we have that capacity in these moments. So I just want to link it now to something else which is relevant for the business context, which is how do we relate to other people, right? It's kind of like in Connected Business, we call it this journey from self-leadership to co-leadership. So let's say I have another colleague, right? And we're working together and there's a conflict happening, right? In that moment, what can happen is either my conditioning or my survival mechanism can kick in. For me, and usually when I'm triggered, I can trigger the other person very fast, right? And then both are kind of in this mechanism. So when we're both, self-aware and have enough mindfulness, which is this capacity in that moment to step back and see what's actually happening, I can almost have a bird perspective on my own reaction and see, wait a second, I'm acting out of survival. This is not reality. This is my survival mechanism that plays so hard that it feels like it's real, but it's not, right? And then in that moment, I can down-regulate that reaction and say, okay, there's no saber-toothed tiger, nothing is life-threatening right now, and I can calm it down and in that moment react according to what's actually just happened, rather than from that story of survival. And when both people do this, then we can, have a conversation that is going very differently than when we're just in this mechanism and we don't even know that it's happening. And it's basically that when we don't run our own car, but this car runs us, and we're just like on the passenger seat.
Yeah.
And we run through life, and that's the reality is many people run through life in this mechanism all day long, and we don't even notice.
Please go on.
I just want to say that was my big aha moment, noticing the difference between those two things. And I'm like, wow, I noticed that I have been asleep for so many years of my life, not even noticing that this was driving the way I saw the world, the way I reacted in conflicts, the way I had my relationships, the way I treated my boss or felt treated by him or her, and all these things, like seeing that this affected my whole life and I didn't even know about it. And of course, that hooked me. I'm like, what? I don't think anyone knows these things, right? And that's when I started teaching it to people, and people were like, wow, I've never heard of that. And I'm like, how come? When this is such an important knowledge, how come no one talks about it in business where we are so in need of these skills, right? So it's just like, and it still is kind of, something that I'm fighting for, that people see the power in it, but also see why it's crucial and not even possible to go to this new paradigm that we all want to aspire to go without having that skill set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well
go
said.
ahead.
As you were speaking, it was reminding me of my own experience when I started my first mindfulness training. It was inspired by John Kabat-Zinn. I read the book Coming to Our Senses, and it started with, as you said, the sense of, oh, it is possible to have less stress. It is possible to perhaps connect with myself better. And as I started, one of the first realizations was at some point when I got over my stress first was all the ways I was expressing that stress. And now that I became aware of that, there was this need to upskill my communication skills. Kind of mindfulness helped me realize it and perhaps lower the baseline, but suddenly it made apparent everything else that was missing as well. And so when we talk about leadership and co-leadership, do you see what are the characteristics of co-leadership? What are the skills that people then end up developing as a result of that first stage of awareness?
Well, the thing is, and I really learned that also from my co-founder, because he's been an expert in co-creation for almost 20 years, I think. And he has really researched co-creation. How do you collaborate in a way that everyone is involved and is empowered in it and everything? And actually, it was one of his findings. Yeah, he did this work and he found you can have the best tools you want for agile project management, for an agility that allows a different, like all those models like holacracy and, but in the end, if people don't have the skill sets, they will still create the same thing, right? They will still create the old way of doing things. And, it blew his mind, but also mine, when we kind of connected the dots and we're like, wow, that makes so much sense. You can't be really, truly co-creative, create an environment of psychological safety and empowerment when you don't have the skill sets, right? For example, of communication, as you just said, right? We need to have the skills to communicate differently in order to create trust in a conversation rather than control, right? Or in leadership, it's like, as a leader, if I keep saying, yes, psychological safety and agile work style is important, right? But then I keep controlling people, then I will never create an environment that is agile and psychologically safe, as much as I talk about it. That's why I really don't like this word mindset shift, because the mindset shift means I'm just thinking differently about things. But I think it's an embodiment shift we need, which means I have to not just have the skill sets and know about them, but I have to embody them enough so I can bring them into action. And once I can do that, I will have, again, the self-awareness in those moments to see, oh, right now I'm going into control, right? And then in that moment, understanding, wow, that's not the decision I want to make. I don't want to control my people. I want to empower them. I want to create psychological safety. So it's not about being the perfect person. Actually, it's about having this intention to create a different paradigm. And this paradigm I'm speaking about, so it's like kind of the vision of the world I see, the business world, but in general, the world, is that we find a way to communicate based on trust, based on psychological safety, based on true diversity that just allows everyone to be uniquely as they are and bring in their unique strengths instead of fitting into boxes or needing to learn something that is not in alignment with our best skill set. Also thinking outside of roles and outside of job description and more into roles that people take on because of their strengths. And then having a culture where everyone can get involved if they want to, but also psychological safety for me doesn't mean everyone is only happy and you're only saying good things all the time. It means I can say something critical and it's met, but I also have learned the skill set to do it in a non-violent way, in a non-controlling way, right? It's not about just like blabbing out the truth that I see, but really taking responsibility for what I'm putting out there and what effect it has on others. Co-leadership means understanding that whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm saying has an effect on the outside. My responsibility is to be clean inside of myself, but also to really check myself, what I'm doing and from which space I'm acting and talking. And if everyone takes that responsibility, then we are also not bullshitting each other, right? Then there's no hidden power structures, but we can also bring this in again and again. This doesn't mean there doesn't need to be hierarchy. It just means, let's say in a project, one person clearly has more knowledge or more skill set because they love this topic or whatever. That person becomes the leader naturally because of what they bring. And next moment, it's someone else, right? Leadership doesn't mean it always needs to be one person. But also some people don't want to be in leadership, right? I mean, my mother told me I was already bossing around people in kindergarten. You know? I mean, now it's funny, but but it also shows my let's say my areas where I have to work, right? Like, because I don't want to really boss around people, but it just means I always took responsibility. It's just something very naturally that I do. So, which means for me, leadership is something I don't even want, but it's just my way of being. But not for everyone that's the case. And we are living in a society where everyone thinks I need to become a leader. Yeah, and then you have a lot of leaders in leadership positions who don't want to be leaders, who are not interested in the dynamics of leadership and putting teams together and everything. They are not fascinated by that process, right? They just want to get things done. And that's when a lot of leadership is also not the way it should be, because it's not only that some people don't have the skill sets, it's also a lot of people do leadership because that's the only way to advance in career, right? That's for us. If you make a career, yeah, if you're successful in it, at some point you need to be a leader. Otherwise you're not. And it's like this whole way of looking at things. One last thing about the new paradigm, for me, it's also understanding that we have an effect on the next generations that come, and taking responsibility for that too, which means taking responsibility for our environment, for our surroundings, for what are we leaving these next generations behind as a world, as a society, what are we creating in our lifetime? Yeah, and really seeing that also as part of who we are, because whatever we do now is the inheritance for the people who come after that. And I can tell you, I do a mentorship program with young girls who are on the verge of starting to work, and they are shocked about what they're finding. And they are shocked about, okay, this is the business world. This is my future for the next 50 years. And they cry about it, and they're, all they want is out of it. And they haven't even gone in it, like for a minute. And everyone says, oh, this new generation is just lazy. But I don't think so. I think actually they get it. They see it maybe much better than I saw it back then, because I really forced myself to like it. And they don't want to do that. And I applaud them for that. And I think they just force us even more to create something differently that they also want to be part of.
Yeah. Do you think young people are more open to taking on this responsibility? Because it's almost as if their starting point is already much more aware than the rest of us. Because the rest of us went through ignorance and conditioning, and then the first steps in mindfulness, and that leads to this whole cascade. But for us, the journey is much bigger, whereas young people seem to start from that point on. Why wouldn't you challenge the status quo? Why wouldn't you do things differently?
Right. I mean, I'm like, what I'm trying, in my mentorship programs is to make sure they don't lose that energy, because they start going in there and then they're like, oh, maybe that's just me and I'm wrong and I shouldn't think like this and I should just like follow what everyone else does, because probably we all felt like this. But what do? There's no information out there for a different way. So what we do, we just adjust and adapt, right? Because that's how you make the career happen. happening. And this is why, for me, it's so important to paint the picture of this new paradigm and really create a leadership for the new paradigm. So we're starting to go towards something that is possible to achieve for all of us, and also giving hope to the young people that there's something else that can happen, but not staying stuck in where we are right now. And I mean, I don't want to say COVID was a good thing, but I see that it forced us to evolve, right? And it forced us in many areas of life, including the business world, to evolve. And this evolution is only just at the beginning. So instead of now going back to normal, going back to how it was, it's a big chance to say, why, you know what, things were crumbling, things were just like, not working the way they needed to anymore. Let's just let them die and create something completely new, reinvent the whole thing, right? So my hope is people start reinventing and really going towards this new way, and no one really knows how this new way looks in the end, but there's potential that we can maybe see and grasp. And that potential is worth fighting for, but also it's inspiring. For me, it's inspiring where I put my life energy because I'm inspired by that vision. Going back to normal sounds really hard and not really like
Yeah, indeed. But I can imagine that change is scary for a lot of people as well.
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
If we dive into this topic a bit more, from your own experience and having worked with now thousands and thousands of people in business, outside of business, how do you see the world of work changing? Because we wanted to talk a bit about new future of work. Let's use the proper terms for this. How has work been in the last 20 years or so, and what changes are you seeing, and what is the future of work from your point of view?
Well, I think we see already the first, parts that have started already before COVID, which is everyone speaks about we need to be more agile, right? So, but what I see changing is instead of us talking through things and then taking another tool, and first it was design thinking and holacracy, and now it's this and that, and, just like taking one story after the other, but not really doing it. I think what happens in future of work is that we're really starting to embody those skill sets, that we're really starting to learn the language of what it means to be in this different way of working. I have an example that I love to use, which is if we imagine this new work, the future of work, being French speaking. Yeah, just for a moment we imagine, okay, so in 10 years when we arrive in the future of work, everyone speaks French, which means, okay, that means we all have to learn French, right?
Right.
So let's say I eat a baguette or a croissant every day in the next 10 years. Once I arrive in the new world of work, I still can't speak the language, even if it makes me feel more French. So this is what we used to do. We just ate a baguette or a croissant. These are like all those tools. We said, mindset shift. We just have to rethink things. And that's where we got stuck, because we can do that. But in the end, we need to learn the vocabularies. And that's a set of skill sets. One of them is emotional intelligence. One of them is self-leadership, really deeply embodying self-leadership and what it means to lead ourselves in all sorts of circumstances. But part of self-leadership is also understanding my individual strengths, my contribution in life, my purpose, right? But like further into what's the contribution I'm offering to a team, to a collective. Because if I go into co-creation and agile working and I don't even know what my contribution is, I can't give it. Yeah, I'm still stuck in that. So I have to really do my own homework. That's part of the skill set of the language we need in the future of work. And then obviously learning, and we can't learn it alone. This is the part where we need others. We need to learn to relate differently and to communicate differently. And what is psychological safety? It's something we learn together. You learn together. How do we do it? If you have never done it, if you never spoken a French word, right? First time you do it, it sounds weird. And you have to speak one word again and again and again. And then at some point, it sounds kind of French. Maybe never really fully, but, you know, it's the same way with, for example, constructive criticism. That creates psychological safety. If I've never done that, the first few times I'm doing it, I'm going to mess it up, right? I'm not going to do it nicely. It's going to create frictions. But that's the learning process of it. And we have to start going into that learning process and really allocate time and resources for that. Instead of saying, well, oh, maybe someone else can do it. Or maybe, you know, oh, next quarter we have like half a day. Can we do it in half a day? Like, we have to really see that if we don't learn the vocabularies now, then we can't speak it in 10 years. Full stop. And if we don't like do it, then, and we only focus on more margin and more, you know, financial gain, it's not going to help us out. Yeah. This is a very short-term thinking.
I hear two things. One is, in a way, mindfulness or any sort of coaching that helps us prepare for this new paradigm is an investment into our own futures. And in a way, it is something that could almost be perhaps quantifiable. Would you say mindfulness is something quantifiable, or is it really something that you see more in the energy that changes around the workplace or people's subjective feelings?
I mean, the good thing is companies have started quantifying it. And one company was SAP, this company implemented this program that has been developed at Google that I was part of, Search Inside Yourself. They implemented it, and they, you know, even have a number for it. They say it had a 200% return on investment in multiple areas of the company, in leadership, in absenteeism, in trust, in leadership, in so many areas that we would say, yeah, that creates more productivity and that creates, in the end, better income for the company, right? But it's short-sighted to just see the income and the numbers, right? It is hard. It has always been for soft skills to be accounted as important because they are not as measurable as other things. But I think you can actually measure over time what kind of psychological safety a team has and the results and the absenteeism, and are people quitting their jobs? What kind of environment are we creating? So, and the good thing is I'm seeing, you know, many of my clients and more companies really becoming aware of it, to see how much of a priority that needs to be. Not just like, let's do this, but like really seeing it as a priority. For my taste, I think it's still not enough. I think they should prioritize it much, much more, because still 99.5% of our time we still spend with things that are not bringing us the long-term effect. But it's a start. Yeah, it's a start. And the thing is, the future will also be much less predictable, right? There's this other part, you know, when it comes to having that skill set also to work with unpredictability. We're going towards a time that is even more unpredictable. If people think like, oh, now COVID is over, now we can predict our life again, it's not where the future goes. The future goes towards less predictability. Also through technology like AI that will make our world much, much faster, and changes will be even faster. Technology will increase the speed, and it's, you know, and not just like 1 time, 2 times increase or something, you know, 100 million folds fast, you know. Once AI has reached its threshold that it can become a full-on self-learning system, then it's gonna get really, really fast, and we're in the middle of that, you know. And I mean, it's clear that this will come. And if we are not prepared, it will overroll us. This whole thing, we won't know how to cope anymore.
Absolutely. All of this change puts a huge demand on our energy, on our attention, and with all the tools and information exchange that is happening, that is definitely accelerating. I guess our brains are not evolving fast enough, and in a way, mindfulness is that skill that kind of gives us a bit more power or output out of what we have. I want to.
Well said. And well said, I think we can actually increase our brain capacity by far. We're not using the capacity. And I would say through mindfulness, my capacity in the brain has definitely increased. But at the same time, we will never be able to compete with machines. We are no machines. We're still human beings. And at some point, we have to just accept we will never be at that. It's not going to happen unless we mix humans with AI or whatever. But that would be another future to talk about.
Indeed. But I want to focus on what you just said and have a different, try to bring in a different perspective on this. What do you think about the power of mindfulness practice over a long time? So you have the first experiences and you start using it at work, but it definitely changes you from the inside out, right? And for somebody who's been practicing for a long time and working with people, what does that power turn you into? You don't just become better at business, right? You change as a person.
No, you completely change. It changes almost, you feel like it changes your DNA. And you definitely understand how much of a capacity as a human being you haven't even been aware of, that capacities I'm using now so naturally that I wasn't aware I had. And that is just because the deeper you go, the more you're also freed up from what I described before, from those mechanisms and those limited thoughts and limiting beliefs and all that stuff. And once you get rid of it more and more, you just understand being a human on a completely different level. And also, you are more connected, not just with yourself and your truth and your authenticity, but also with others, right? You can see more and sense more into, let's say, sometimes when I was still running my team at Google, one of my employees said, how do you do this? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, you always know when a conflict is about to arise. And I'm like, well, it's so obvious, no? And he said, no, it's not. I don't even know how you do it. And it's just like those moments just made me notice that I have gained that capacity. It's not something, spiritual or psychic or something. It's just reading what's happening in the moment and being aware of that. When I'm in my head and my stories and all that stuff, I can't see those things. I just don't notice. Maybe I give you another example, which I really love, which is we had once this, he was a leader of like thousands of people in his team, and he had a very, very busy life, but he also had like children at home and a family. And he described that after the first day of the Switch Inside Yourself training, he went home. And normally what happens when he goes home, his children are waiting in front of the door and they are like, papi, papi, and then they tell him a ton of stuff and everything. And usually when he comes home, he's actually really stressed out from work and still has his head full of stuff. And when they come, it stresses him out. It's a very stressful moment for him because on the one hand, he feels guilty for not really greeting them. On the other hand, it's too much for him and overwhelming. So on that one day after the SRY training, he decided to stop and stay in his car and just do a 5-minute mindfulness practice to land before he goes, home, and just also intentionally let go of his work. So he did that. He came, he opened the door. Same thing happens like always. His children come and like, papi, and they tell him all these things. And he said, all of a sudden, he could see what's actually happening in that moment. things that he missed before all these times, all these years, which was, wow, what a gift to be greeted like this by people who love me every day. But he also looked into the eyes of his children, and for the first time he could see the love in their eyes. And he's like, he was so happy that, and he, like the way he described it, I just loved it. He said, I have had this moment over and over again for years, and I can't believe I missed how precious this is and what a gift I'm receiving every day. I was just feeling so stressed that I was like, really? That, And this is the power of mindfulness. I mean, for me, this example shows it so clearly. It's just in the moment you are really there with what you're doing, you stop missing all those details. All those details that make an experience life-changing. And when you feel inspired and touched and loved and you love back and all those things, rather than going in being stressed, being completely in your head and not freed up, and then giving your children the feeling of rejecting their love in that moment, which he did before. And I don't want to talk about what he was doing, but basically that was his reaction, was rejecting it in that moment. So this is the power of it, that we're becoming aware of the details that make life special, and that when we are on a deathbed and we're looking back to life, we will remember those moments. And I don't know how it is for you, but I noticed very early on that when I looked at my OKRs and all the goals I've achieved and all this stuff at the end of the year, that wasn't really what made me happy. What made me happy were those moments with my colleagues when we celebrated something, or we had a lot of fun, or where we just were silly together. Those moments were the ones that I treasured the most. And when I think back in my time in all those different corporates that I've worked with, those people are what I remember, not this one project where I did this. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good example, and it totally resonates as well. The more you practice, the more you start to see its impact everywhere. You start with the stress reduction, but you realize that you have been missing out on all the positive that has been happening around you, and you start appreciating that, and that gratitude then spills over back into work and back into life. And in a way, the simple things in life start to show their magic and beauty, and you start to appreciate it. So
very well said.
So my question to you, what if a lot of people started doing this and on this self-awareness journey got to that point and went beyond? What sort of a world would that look like?
For me, that world would look like this new paradigm that we're just living differently with each other. We're having more balance, less burnout, self-isolated, less shaming. We would work together, we would collaborate, we would have more fun together, we would empower each other more. There wouldn't be jealousy or control or power plays, but instead we would have enough trust and psychological safety that we would really see each other in who we are and what we bring, which means I could be a total mess. And I wouldn't be rejected from the group or from, I would be part of it, even if I'm a mess on that day. Or I could even speak to that and say, guys, I love you all, but it's been 2 years of COVID sitting at the computer, and I just I'm having a week where I feel depressed. And then other colleagues said, oh, wow, I feel the same, I feel also isolated. Or that one thing that was said, I felt controlled by that. Okay, let's have discussions. Let's have conversations about these things. It's not a bad thing in itself, right? We all have these moments when we still act in this way, including me. But it's about, this environment where we can make mistakes. But the intention of all of us is to really be there with each other, for each other, and see each other, even in a company, as a community of human beings that come together. Of course, we need to earn money and achieve certain things, but we are still human beings spending most of our time there, most of our lifetime. And having, a respectful, meaningful time there together, and also, creating an environment and ideally products that benefit our planet. That don't make it worse, but that start really giving an impact on our planet, making it more sustainable, making it less filled with trash, and really going into action. And my belief is that the more you are connected to yourselves and your environment, the more you want that. Right? And I think as a world, we still have a lot to do, because environment is still a big topic, but also there's still children starving in many areas of the world. And that can't, in my picture of how this new paradigm looks like, we don't have that anymore. We have fixed that. We have fixed the fact that we could have food for everyone in the world, but we just don't. In my world, we care about it so much that whatever we're doing, it will fix that too. Right? And I'm really also seeing that even if other countries are in a disadvantage, that we don't want to be superior to them, because you see this, what we have in business, you see it everywhere in the world, because we keep creating that same thing, which means one is better than the other. One has more advantages than the other. And my personal wish is that we really look into that and see, well, how can we create a world where it's not a competition and not one needs to be better than the other, but everyone can have the same. Right? And maybe those of us who live in privileged countries don't have as much, but we know in the end that everyone has, water, clean water, and food. Let's start with those basic things, right? I'm not even talking about fancy stuff, but if we achieve that is when I'm gonna die, that I will be proud of, leaving the next generations behind.
May your wish come true.
Yes! Well, I will do everything I can for it, and I hope a lot of people will join that.
I hope so too. So, Mounira, I feel like we could talk forever, but the episode comes to an end soon. So, last question to you. If you had a giant billboard and millions of people would walk past it and see it, what would you put on it?
Oh my God, that's a good question. What would I put on that billboard? Yeah, I think I would remind everyone, I would put on the billboard the question, what do you do in your lifetime that you're proud of leaving the next generations behind?
All right, we'll let that sink in. Mounira, this has been a wonderful episode. For our listeners out there, I hope you enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed it. Mounira can be found on connected-b, that is connectedbusiness.com, and of course on LinkedIn as well, and has her book as well. Look for, let me find the appropriate title again, Connected Business, How I Learned to Lead Myself and Others by Ariston Random House Publishing. Mounira, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming to the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Hussein.
Thank you. And to our listeners, see you soon again. Ciao.
Bye.